Good morning, everybody. So it looks like the rematch between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, the pay-per-view, when it's all said and done, will do about 800,000 buys here in North America. Now, of course, this does not take into consideration foreign TV sponsorships and the live gate, all that stuff. And we'll talk about that in a second. But all things considered, okay, 800,000 buys when you consider the media push and how well this thing ended up trending in social media and the mainstream media, it's disappointing and it's concerning. So we'll talk about numbers in just a second, but I got to own something. I think it was Sunday, I posted a video here, a live video, where I was just giving some post-fight thoughts. And I mentioned there that I was hearing from reliable sources, some people I trust, that this thing could do close to 2 million pay-per-view buys. And of course, we're not even going to get half of that. It's not even going to crack 1 million. Now, I need to back up a little bit. And look, this is why I don't like talking about this stuff before the numbers come out, because estimates could be all over the place, and the changing guard of the media, I mean, when it comes to cutting the cord and streaming everything, we just don't know how to chop this stuff up yet. But let me just say, those early projections were based on social media trending, social media impressions. People were looking at how this thing trended, and it was all over Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It was everywhere. And then it was on the mainstream sports media as well. It was all over SportsCenter and all that stuff. But even like Fox News, CNN were talking about this fight. I think even one of the presidential debates, one of the politicians talked about it, right? So it was really trending. And people were looking at those numbers and comparing it to other recent events and what those events did on pay-per-view, TV ratings, all that, and kind of just doing projections based off that. And based on the trending, it looked like a fight that broke through and was going to do those sorts of numbers. But of course, in this new world where there's so much piracy, it's really difficult to tell. And now that we're getting some of the piracy projections, and it looks like globally, tens of millions of people posted and found illegal streams to watch this fight on. And in the United States, it was over 10 million. So over 10 million people in the United States pirated this fight, and less than 1 million ponied up the money to pay for it. So when you look at the numbers, okay, and I'm not going to spend too long getting into all the math stuff, getting too nerdy on this stuff, but just to let you guys know, I mean, if this thing did 800,000 pay-per-view buys, once you cut that in half, because the cable provider, they actually now get a little more than half with most of these deals, especially when you consider the promotional push. So that's about 30 million in pay-per-view revenue, right? And then you have the live gate, which was about 17 million. So being generous, we'll call that 50 million, but it's probably a little short of that, okay? The pay-per-view revenue and the live gate's probably a little short of 50, but we'll call it 50 here. But then there's foreign TV money, and we don't know the UK pay-per-view numbers yet. And, of course, sponsorships and merchandise, which there's not a whole lot there. But if we're being friendly, okay, if we're being friendly here, we can call that 10 million. All right, but it's probably not that much. So altogether, you're talking 60 million, and that's me being very, very friendly. Both fighters were guaranteed a purse of 28 million plus pay-per-view upside, which there's not going to be any of. So 28 million times 2 is obviously 56 million. That leaves 4 million over with my projection to pay for the undercard and everything else. Okay, there's other fees associated. So all in all, guys, I don't know if this show broke even. Maybe it did, all things considered. Maybe I'm underestimating the foreign TV money. Maybe this was a blockbuster over with UK pay-per-view. Their pay-per-view structure over there, very, very different than here in the United States. So you can't really compare the numbers, okay? But all things considered, when you saw the media push and everything else, this thing was nowhere near as profitable as they were hoping. And I think that means we're probably going to get a third fight because they need that third fight now. And I also think it's concerning because does this mean we're not going to get as many of these across the aisle kind of fights that we got with this one? You know, I thought this was a big thing with Top Rank and PBC working together, and it made me hopeful if this thing was going to do really, really big numbers. And let's be honest, okay? We need to say this. in terms of the pay-per-view numbers it did do and the live gate that it did do, it was a successful promotion. The issue is both fighters were overpaid. And I think that particularly with Deontay Wilder, but also with Tyson Fury, the star power of these two guys, at least where it was going into this fight, was greatly overestimated by some people in the media, especially friendly, supportive people in the American fight press as it relates to PBC, Heyman / Deontay Wilder. The star power there is a little over-exaggerated because somebody trends on Twitter or trends on social media, and you guys have seen these estimates that ESPN does, or these little surveys that they post of, who's trending highest on the internet. How many Google searches, how many social media impressions, blah, blah, blah. But that can be a little misleading because you could have a GIF or just a little video like one of Deontay's knockouts or the whole "to this day" thing that trended a lot and is still all over social a lot of times, now kind of being used to mock him coincidentally. But something like that can really, really trend, and it can really, really trend in certain segments of the community. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's breaking through and that the guy is a consistently popular athlete in comparison to other guys, like let's say a LeBron James or somebody like that. So all that stuff could be misleading. And I think people are still trying to figure out how all this stuff correlates and translates into actual dollars spent by the fans. So, original estimates made this thing look much, much bigger. And let me be clear, it was a big fight that did break through. It was all over social, like I said before. It did do a big crowd, a big gate. People in the mainstream media here in the United States were talking about boxing. That doesn't happen very much. It's very rare. It's a couple times a year. So this event broke through on that side. And it broke through in comparison to recent pay-per-views, okay? But it wasn't as big as the people involved on both sides of the promotion thought it was. And I think people need to take a step back and relook at this stuff. Star appeal, I talked about this. Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury, their first fight did about 300,000. Some estimates have it upwards of 325,000 pay-per-view buys. So obviously, this did more than twice that. And if you look, I just looking at myself, going back a few months ago, and you guys were asking me what I thought it would do. I thought it would do about 700 or so, 800,000 pay-per-view buys. I never thought it would crack 1 million. I didn't think it'd get close to 1 million. Go back and look at my tweets. Go back at episodes of The Neutral Corner where I talked about that, and you'll clearly hear me say that, okay? But I started to buy into the hype myself. I will admit that. I started to, when Bob Arum said this thing's going to do 2 million buys, I thought the old man's crazy. He's smoking some really strong shit these days. But I started to buy into it when I saw the social media trending. I went back and pulled some analytics on my own Twitter over this last weekend. My own tweets about this fight did well in the millions of Twitter impressions, okay? Several million Twitter impressions. I'm not exaggerating. Now, I tweeted a bunch of times, but I had multiple tweets that would have over 100,000 or so Twitter impressions alone just with one tweet. And when you combine that with, 200 tweets or whatever, you see the numbers that I did. Now, some of you might be saying, well, that ain't shit. There's other Twitter people who do millions and millions of Twitter impressions every day. Well, I don't. I have less than 10,000 followers on Twitter. So for me, just seeing what it did on my Twitter feed, it was like, whoa, this thing broke through. So, yeah. Back to Wilder, though. 275,000 pay-per-view buys, around that, maybe 250 or so for the Luis Ortiz rematch. So it's clear Wilder needed the dance partner. It's clear that Fury brought a little bit extra buys in that his first pay-per-view, and that fell off in that rematch with Luis Ortiz. So it's the same thing with Tyson Fury, though. He's never been a big star. He's never been this transcendent star over in the UK like Anthony Joshua has been. Now, that might change now with his performance in this rematch. And maybe the third fight here in the United States does do better numbers. I'm not so sure. But comparative, you just go back and look at the ratings these guys did. before this. This is not surprising right now to see these numbers. I have to say, though, I have to talk about a tweet because I think this proves a point that I was trying to make in a tweet that I posted last week that I took a lot of shit for. And I'm just going to go ahead and quote the tweet because a lot of you guys watching this already know what I'm talking about. I tweeted on February 21st. I haven't deleted it. You can go find it. As a lifelong boxing guy, I just want to thank the British, Mexican, British-American, Mexican-American fans. Without you, our sport would be all but extinct. Now, that was me responding to the walk-up crowd during fight week that I saw all the British fans there in Las Vegas basically take over Vegas and make it like a little London, a little England in the middle of the desert there in Nevada. It was amazing to see that. And I've been to events. I didn't get to cover this event live, but I've been to several events in the last 4 or 5 years alone where I've seen the Mexican fan contingent and the British fan contingent take over a city, at least an arena, and an event against an American fighter. Sometimes it's two guys who aren't even American, but it involves a Mexican fighter or a British fighter. And it's amazing to see people travel thousands of miles and spend tons of their own money to support their fighters when American fans don't do the same per capita. Keep in mind, this country has over 300 million people. England, not even close, right? England's a very small country compared to the United States. So what my tweet wasn't saying, like I wasn't trying to put down American fans. And some people, I should say this for those of you who don't know, there was a small group of wacko activist nut jobs who took my tweet and sent it all over Twitter saying that it was racist and making it me trying to bash. They added their own context and their own subtext to it, me bashing black boxing fans, which I didn't mention black boxing fans. I didn't mention white boxing fans because there's plenty of black British fans because I talk to you guys all the time. So I thought that was ridiculous that people added their own context and subtext to it. It went on, ranting and raving, saying I'm this, that, the other, throwing all these labels at me, which was ignorant and ridiculous, but, it's 2020. Still, though, the point of my tweet was not to put down any other fan base, but to say that for these large events, every year we see more and more evidence of it, that Mexican fans, whether they're in America or in Mexico, British fans, whether they're in England or in America, because I know a lot of you guys that live here in the United States, were born over there in the UK, and regularly attend events here and are huge boxing fans. I talk to you guys every day as well. Keep in mind, guys, I work with a British fight magazine, so I'm pretty plugged into the scene over there. And I routinely see those two fan contingents, regardless of race or ethnicity, I'm talking about nationality, heritage, whatever word you want to use, supporting this sport with their dollars, showing up in person, buying the pay-per-views. I routinely see that. Why did Floyd Mayweather every year fight around Cinco de Mayo and Mexican Independence Day? Is Floyd Mayweather Mexican? No. Last time I checked, he's not of Mexican heritage, but he knew damn well whether he was fighting an American guy, somebody from Mexico, somebody from Venezuela, it didn't matter. Right? It didn't matter what part of the world. It could be a Japanese dude. He never fought anyone from Japan. I'm just saying. Well, actually, he did later on. But he was fighting on those two holidays in Las Vegas. He depended on the Mexican fan contingent to show up. It doesn't mean that there weren't fans of every walk of life supporting Floyd Mayweather. Obviously, there were. And there's wonderful fans of all backgrounds. But those two fan contingents show up. They're dependable. And you saw that again this week. So my tweet, for all the grief I took from a very small segment of idiots, I proved my point because the majority of the fans that bought tickets to that fight, okay, I'm not talking about the celebrities and all the people that wanted to just get a selfie and post something on their Instagram because they're a quote-unquote influencer and they wanted to say, I'm at this big event, look at me, I'm cool. I'm talking about actual fans, okay? British fans traveled, what is it? How many miles from England over there? 3,500 miles, I think it is, from England Actually, you know what? It's probably more than that. It's probably 5,000 plus miles to travel from England, from London, over to Vegas. It's got to be maybe 6,000 miles. So you have thousands of people traveling 6,000 miles, doing that, 10-hour flight or whatever it is? It's probably longer than that. And spending thousands of dollars on top of that for tickets, hotel, everything else to support their fighter. And then you look at the pay-per-view buys here in the United States, and a lot of you activists out there, a lot of you Deontay Wilder apologists who now, in a subsequent week where he's a tirade of excuses and you're all apologizing for him, you're saying Kenny Bayless was biased against Wilder, which is ridiculous. You're buying into the heavy costume thing, which is also ridiculous. You're buying into all this stuff, and yet there's a lot of you out there, you know damn well, did not spend your $80 and buy that pay-per-view. You found an illegal stream to watch it for free. So for all your activism on Twitter, all your activism on YouTube, a lot of you are some pretty hypocritical motherfuckers that got this fight for free on some illegal stream because look at the numbers, man. 800,000 pay-per-view buys. And again, we know a large contingent of the people that bought that pay-per-view were probably Mexican-American fans because they buy most of the pay-per-views. That's just the way it works, guys. And after that, it's a mixture of people of all walks of life. But a lot of you, and by the way, it's people of different ethnicities who are, being activists for Deontay Wilder. It's not all Black American activists. There's plenty of Anglo guys out there fighting the good fight and talking all this trash, yet not spending their money to go attend the fight live, not spending the money to watch the pay-per-view. The proof is in the numbers, guys. The way this thing was trending on social media, it should have done twice the amount of pay-per-view buys it did. There's a lot of you out there who are talking a lot of shit online, but you're not ponying up and putting your money where your mouth is. So I think there's a lot of hypocrites involved in this, man. 2 Super Bowl ads for this fight. ESPN is in over 80 million homes. Fox is in over 120 million homes. And yet, this thing could not do a competitive gate in comparison with both Canelo-Golovkin fights, and it did not do as many pay-per-view buys. Compare. Canelo-Golovkin was on HBO. It only had HBO promoting it. There was no promotion on SportsCenter on ESPN. There was no Fox platforms promoting that fight. Only HBO, which is in a fraction of the amount of homes that ESPN and Fox are in. Yet, both of those fights did well north of 1 million pay-per-view buys. And some of you will say, well, that was ancient. That was forever ago. Guys, it was a couple years ago. All right? Cord cutting and all that has been around for several years. Is it more so today than it was just a year or two ago? Sure, yes. But it's not like it's 2-1, okay? It's not like it's this huge thing. Both those fights, and yes, I get it, they were at T-Mobile Arena instead of MGM Grand. So there's more seats, there's more tickets to sell. But the bottom line is both of those fights did somewhere, I think, in the mid to upper 20 millions in terms of live gate. They both did more merchandise sales. They both had more international sponsors. Of course, they did huge numbers on Mexican television and in several European countries. So the foreign TV money was very, very big, bigger than what we're going to get on this one. And the actual pay-per-view buys on a much smaller platform did better. There also happened to be a Mexican fighter in both of those cards. All right? I'm just going to put that out there. Yes, it was around Mexican holiday. I get it. That matters too. But this fight with Wilder and Fury had a huge promotion machine behind it. It didn't have the NFL to compete with. Major League Baseball is not kicking yet. And the NBA and NHL are nowhere near playoff time yet. So this was right in the middle in a sweet spot. You're not dealing with March Madness, college basketball, college football, which is a colossal thing here in the United States. That's over. They had no one to compete with this weekend. No one. I think there was a UFC event, but it was nowhere near as big as this event. So all things considered, for all the trending this did, for all the hashtag activism from Deontay Wilder people mostly, saying he's this huge, massive megastar who's not getting the respect he deserved, well, a lot of you didn't pony up and give him your $80. because it's not showing in the numbers. So, all right, what does this mean? Is this simply the fact that neither of these guys, at least now, I think Tyson Fury now is going to become one of those guys? Because bottom line, I mean, this thing still did tens of millions of dollars of revenue combined with all the streams I talked about, pay-per-view, LiveGate, everything else. So it was still a massive, massive event, okay? And Tyson Fury won big time. So maybe now he's become one of those top brands. And I talked about that on the Neutral Corner Monday. But I almost knocked over my coffee here. That would have been very bad, all over my equipment. That would not be good. But is it the fact that neither one of these guys was a huge household name coming in? Is that why this thing didn't break through north of 1 million pay-per-view buys? If that's all it is, then it's okay. Because look, it did 325,000 buys. The rematch does 800,000 buys. Maybe the third fight does 1.1 million buys, 1.2 million buys like they were hoping this one did. Then this is all good because this is how you build. It's normal. This is the way it's been done in boxing for eons. Or is this showing us the new world? That you got two heavyweights, two English-speaking heavyweights, one from the USA, one from the UK. Americans love the Brits. Look at our music. Look at our, all the actors and everything and actresses we love to see in our movies. Middle America loves the British, athletes and entertainers. So having two huge heavyweights, one American, one British. In terms of demographics, you're thinking, oh man, this is perfect, right? It's the big boys. It's in Vegas. Again, they're not competing with any other big-time sporting events. They have basically that weekend to themselves. And there's a massive media push. And despite all that, all the propaganda, you've been told 8,000 times Deontay Wilder is the hardest puncher in heavyweight history. Tyson Fury is the best thing since Muhammad Ali. None of those statements are true. Neither of them, okay? But you were told that over and over by both sides of the promotion. Despite all that propaganda, all that bullshit, we couldn't even crack 1 million pay-per-view buys. Meanwhile, Conor McGregor just fought a completely one-sided fight against, or I should say a complete mismatch, all right, against a guy coming off 2 losses, one a first-round knockout loss, and that did over 1 million pay-per-view buys. And Conor McGregor, he's not American. He's not a heavyweight, right? So I think, and Floyd Mayweather, his recent events, when he fought Conor McGregor, that fight trended. That was huge, right? It's still about names. It's not necessarily about the guys being huge, being heavyweights. It's not necessarily about an undefeated record and the O and all the propaganda and all that. I think it's still about names. I still think names like Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, Canelo Alvarez, Conor McGregor, those names trend. Those names break through. Those brands are what get people to buy pay-per-view fights. So despite all the propaganda, that's not necessarily going to sell a fight, man. This was a great matchup. Now, the undercard was shit. And I also should mention this. The $80 pay-per-view price tag. In comparison, I think the UFC price tag for Conor McGregor, that was $60. If this fight was priced $20 cheaper, how many of you out there may have said, you know what? All right, I'll give him my $60. That's not so bad. That's cheaper than some of these other recent pay-per-views. Could that be a difference? Is there a price tag? Is there a price point where you guys would buy in and you'd say, all right, if it's $50, I'll buy this? Because shit, if I went to the fight, the cheapest ticket's going to be $50 anyway. Hell, 4 beers is $50, right? So how many of you guys out there would buy in? Is the $80 price tag killing it? Or is it simply the fact that a lot of people who claim to be diehard fans of this fighter, that fighter, whoever, simply do not put their money where their mouth is? And once again, consistently, the British fans and Mexican fans do put their money where their mouth is. Full disclosure, I am neither British nor Mexican. So I have no stake in this fight. You know what I'm saying? I'm not including myself in this argument. It's just something I've noticed from working in the business for a while here. And why I said in my tweet that this sport would be all but extinct without those fan contingents is because it's not that other fans, look, guys, I go to fights all the time. I just went to Gervonta Davis's fight here in Atlanta a couple months ago. That was primarily black Americans, right, that bought those tickets to that fight. So fans of all walks of life, Eastern European fans, Italian American fans are still a big contingent in the New York, New Jersey area, Polish fans in Chicago. I mean, I could keep going on and on here, okay? Filipino fans over in Los Angeles and the Bay Area. So there are all sorts of fan contingents, but the two that spend a huge money consistently every year are the two I pointed out. And I think that that's going to continue. And I think the powers that be in boxing, particularly in the American fight scene, some of these old timers that have been around for ages and are used to seeing things a certain way need to wake up and start making adjustments with the way that they market these fights and the way they price them and what they're paying fighters. Because I think the market's a little overinflated. Probably a lot overinflated. I think people are getting overpaid. I never will knock a fighter for getting paid as much as they can. If somebody wants to throw you a boatload of money, why the hell wouldn't you take it, especially if you're risking your life in the ring, right? So I'm not blaming the fighters at all. I think it's the powers that be in the sport that have to realize the fans, while there's still a portion of the fans that are being easily manipulated, and that's happened forever, fans are getting smarter. One thing social media has done, and this is not just in boxing, this is in all forms of media, people can fact check now. People talk on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is, and there's guys like me out there sifting through the bullshit, telling you guys, hey, listen, Deontay Wilder's not the hardest puncher in boxing history. Pound for pound, he's probably not even the hardest puncher right now in boxing. He is in the heavyweight division, of course. And Tyson Fury, there's massive holes in this guy's resume. There's a almost 3-year massive hole in it that everyone just keeps overlooking. So, like, you know, I'm just one of several that is out there telling you guys this stuff. So now fans can do their own version of fact checking. They can read the gray area. They can read the fine print, right? That wasn't happening 20, 30 years ago when you could just throw a bunch of guys on pay-per-view and look, some of those cards were stacked back in the day, okay? And now the cards are shit for the most part, except for the main event. But there was, as I would say, there was no other show in town 20, 30 years ago. Now there is. There's competition. And more than that, fans have taken the power into their own hands, and they'll pirate an event. They will find a stream. They'll watch it there. They no longer have to go to Vegas and spend $20 on a beer and pay for parking at MGM where they didn't have 2 years ago, and all that stuff. They don't have to go drop $5K over a weekend to go see a fight in Vegas when they could stay at home and not even pay $80 for pay-per-view. They could just get the damn thing for free on a stream somewhere. There's a lot of streaming services now where you pay $5 and they're going to guarantee that you get a stream that doesn't crack. So there's people out there paying $5, $10 for services that provide illegal streams. It's all out there, right? So the fans now, particularly fans under 30, I would say, are ahead of the curve. They're ahead of the promoters. They're ahead of the network executives. They're literally a step ahead of those guys. And that wasn't happening 20 years ago. The Mayweather-Pacquiao era, where those guys were getting away with that stuff, that's done. That is done. Now, if Floyd and Manny fight again, yes, that pay-per-view will do big numbers, of course, because they're names like I talked about. But in terms of the technology and building up new guys going forward, the people in charge, the powers that be in this sport, got to rethink it. And a lot of you out there who are being big-time activists on Twitter and giving guys like me grief, adding your own context and subtext to my tweets, accusing me of saying things that I never said, you're some damn hypocrites because you're not putting your money where your mouth is. And in the end, if we don't get that Crawford versus Errol Spence fight, it's because of you guys.